Chosen ones, brace yourself, because what I'm about to reveal sounds like it's ripped from a movie script. But it is reality. The CIA has just opened a case on your ex, and the truth behind it will shake you to your core. This isn't just about heartbreak, betrayal, or another chapter in the story of your past. This is about divine justice, catching up in ways no one expected. Remember what Scripture says: do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. Galatians 6:6. Your ex thought they could set fire to your life and walk away. But chosen one, those flames have become evidence, and now the smoke is filling their own house. You were never ordinary. You carried a sacred light, a rare divina energy, and they treated it as disposable, as if heaven would remain silent. They laughed with gossipers, sat among haters, and played games with your soul, forgetting that the universe records everything. But energy doesn't vanish. Justice doesn't sleep. And now the consequences they thought they escaped have arrived with a force they cannot silence. Before we dive deeper into this shocking revelation, I need you to engage comment 777 if you're ready to align with the truth. And thank you from the depths of my heart to everyone who has supported me through Super Thanks. Your presence here is more than support, it's a partnership in spreading light. What comes next will not only expose the magnitude of this case, but also reveal why your ex's actions weren't just personal. They were spiritual crimes against someone chosen by God. Get ready, because the truth will blow your mind. God's chosen ones. The CIA just opened a case on your ex. The truth will blow your mind. And now the universe is collecting the debt they created. A debt they never imagined would come due with such intensity. A breakup on its own is common. People drift. People grow. Seasons change. But what unfolded in your life was not a simple departure. It was a carefully masked ambush. A spiritual strike cloaked in the illusion of love, unraveling. As Paul warns in Galatians 6-7, do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows, and their harvest is now arriving with relentless force. They did not merely walk away, they forged unholy alliances with those who despised you, mocked your healing, laughed at your scars, and sought to replace your hard-won peace with chaos. Did they truly believe that heaven was blind, that justice was asleep, that divine law could somehow be bypassed like a loophole in a man-made contract? Karma does not sleep. But even more powerful than karma is divine justice, which never misplaces its ledger. As Job 4:8 declares, those who plow evil and those who sow trouble reap it. Their choices are now the very evidence that condemns them. Their peace is fractured, their focus scattered, their nights turned into restless battlegrounds. Why does the silence feel so loud to them now? Because they are haunted not merely by memory, but by the absence of your divine frequency, the resonance of your presence that once kept their soul aligned. Like an instrument stripped of its tuning fork, they vibrate only with dissonance. Chosen one, you were not merely a partner, you were an anchor in their storm, a lifeline across the raging sea. They severed that cord, and now every breath feels like gasping in a vacuum. Psalm 34:21 whispers the truth into their restless nights. Evil will slay the wicked, the foes of the righteous will be condemned. They will never confess it openly, but they were never prepared for someone like you. You carried too much light, too much unshakable authenticity, too much truth that stripped away their disguises. Like Judas sitting at the table, they thought betrayal would secure their advantage. Yet betrayal only sealed their downfall, and when they could not rise to meet the standard of your spirit, they tried to pull you down to their own swamp of mediocrity. What happened when that failed? They twisted the narrative, shifted the blame, and ran straight into the arms of the same crowd who once laughed at your journey. History repeats itself with chilling accuracy. Think of the tragic tale of Caravaggio, the Italian painter whose brilliance was shadowed by his violent choices. Though celebrated in art, his alliances with darkness destroyed him from within. Your ex smiled as your name was dragged through the dirt, echoing the arrogance of Goliath who thought size guaranteed victory. Forgetting that even giants fall when they mock the anointed, Shakespeare captured this self-destruction in Macbeth, where ambition without conscience turns every victory into madness. Is that not the very theater your enemies now perform in their own conscience, staging nightly plays of regret and paranoia? But creation itself testifies against them, like wolves that turn on one another when prey is scarce. Their alliances unravel under the weight of suspicion, like the baobab tree that swells too large and splits itself from the inside. The very ego they embraced becomes the crack that shatters them. Isaiah 48:22 thunders, "There is no peace for the wicked," and the echo of that word reverberates through their sleepless nights. A man once told me he was a simple shopkeeper from a quiet town, that betraying someone who prayed for you is like burning the very bridge you need when the floodwaters rise. His wisdom was not learned from books, but from scars. And scars often speak louder than sermons. In music, the truth resounds. In Mozart's Requiem, the Dies Irae surges with thunderous chords, declaring that the day of reckoning cannot be outrun. Do you feel the parallel? Their laughter once rang like a chorus, but now every note collapses into dissonance, every harmony breaking into lament. Your voice still haunts them in dreams. Your reflection still flickers in passing strangers, because truth once encountered cannot be unlearned. John 1-5 affirms this eternal reality. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. So rise, chosen one. Stand tall in the architecture of heaven, where your life is not a ruin, but a cathedral under construction. Every stone of trial forming a pillar of strength. Do not mourn the ones who betrayed you. They are already trapped in the prison they built. This is your moment to lift your head, to let your frequency resonate higher, to let your light blaze wider. Their chaos cannot eclipse your calling. Stand, and let the world see that God's chosen cannot be silenced. They feel your presence in places you have never stepped. As though your essence lingers in the air, they breathe. Every laugh they hear becomes a desperate search, reaching for the echo of your joy. Yet they grasp nothing but emptiness, and what cuts them deeper than a blade is this truth: you cannot be replaced. Ecclesiastes 4:12 says, though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken, yet they severed the bond that held them secure. And now every strand of their life unravels. They thought they had secured an upgrade, but the new embrace feels hollow, like biting into fruit that looks ripe, yet crumbles tasteless on the tongue. Isn't it haunting how what they believed would bring abundance has become a famine to their soul? What they lost was never just companionship, it was divine protection. They lost the shield of your prayers, the power of your intercession, the light that walked with them through their darkest valleys. Psalm 11 He will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. And you were that living proof, standing in the gap for battles they never even knew raged. Now stripped of that covering, they wander exposed. Can victory truly come when the armor has been thrown away mid-battle? This kind of loss does not vanish. It lingers like smoke after fire, clinging to skin and choking every breath. You were the one who stood as their strength, yet they despised the very gift sent to lift them higher. Romans 1:22 pierces through the fog of their illusions. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools. Is it not clear now that their so-called wisdom has turned into chains around their own necks? Nature itself testifies. When a mighty tree in the forest is cut down, it does not only fall, it leaves a clearing where silence replaces birdsong, and emptiness stretches where life once thrived. That is their soul now, stripped of the covering they abandoned, and history's stories repeat with ruthless precision. Think of King Saul, once chosen and anointed, but poisoned by jealousy and fear until he lost the very favor that secured his crown. Is this not the same pattern mocking grace, rejecting protection, and collapsing under the weight of their own rebellion? Psalm 34:21 warns with sobering truth. Evil will slay the wicked, the foes of the righteous will be condemned. They cannot escape the echoes of what they destroyed. Every face in a crowd reminds them of yours. Every night drags them into a battlefield of regret. And every morning begins with the weight of emptiness. Isaiah 54:17 thunders through the silence. No weapon formed against you shall prosper. And this is why their schemes collapse while yours rise higher. So rise now, chosen one. Do not shrink. Do not doubt. You are not defined by what abandoned you. You are defined by what cannot be shaken. You walk in renewal while they remain in ruins. Lift your head. Step into your season. And declare with your very life that heaven's chosen cannot be erased. Stay with me, chosen one, because if your spirit is truly awakened, there is no turning away from this truth. It vibrates not just in your ears, but deep within your soul, like a frequency tuned to heaven's own resonance. They didn't simply lose a relationship, they violated something sacred. Proverbs 14:9 reminds us that fools mock at making amends for sin, but goodwill is found among the upright. And the greatest kind of fool is the one who mistakes divine love and spiritual protection for something ordinary. Your ex wasn't walking away from romance alone. They abandoned a heavenly gift, a sacred instrument of growth placed directly in their path. When someone turns their back on a chosen one, the consequences do not stop at broken hearts. They ripple outward, like waves struck by an unseen hand, shaking every dimension of their existence. You were never just a character in their narrative, you were a shift in the plot, a divine portal in human form, a chapter that could have rewritten their ending. Does it not amaze you how those who once stood closest can be blind to the very light that was illuminating their way? Instead of cherishing that gift, they treated you as though you were only another stop on their restless journey. Psalm 118:22 declares, "The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone." And your rejection echoes this eternal truth. You were the cornerstone they dismissed. And now the weight of their own house collapses on shifting sand. They ask themselves why everything feels unbearably heavy, why peace slips through their hands like water, why every victory tastes hollow, and why blessings stall as though delayed in transit. Isn't the answer already written across the ruins of their choices? It is because they didn't just walk away from you, they fractured a covenant they never even understood. In psychology, we call it breaking attachment bonds. But in heaven's architecture, it is the tearing of a covenant, a sacred design meant to elevate. Hebrews 13:20 speaks of the blood of the eternal covenant, reminding us that when God ordains a bond, it carries éternelle significance. When someone connects with a chosen one, it is never about casual affection, it is a divine bond, woven with threads of protection and blessing. Breaking that bond carelessly carries a cost heavier than gravity itself. The blessings, the protection, the clarity, the elevation, they were never random. They were drawn by your presence, your discipline, your prayers that bent the atmosphere in their favor. In physics, we call it resonance. The way one frequency lifts another, that was what you carried. Do you realize now why their life dimmed when you left? I recall the words of a man named Matteo, a janitor in a small town school. He once told his co-workers, "When someone prays for you daily, you walk under a roof you cannot even see." His life was ordinary, his hands calloused, but his insight carried eternity. That was you for them, the invisible roof. And yet they dismissed it. Just as Israel once rejected the prophets sent for their salvation, Jeremiah 2:13 cuts through the fog. My people have committed two sins, they have forsaken me, the spring of living water, and have dug their own cisterns, broken cisterns that cannot hold water. Is that not their life now, trying to drink from cracked vessels that only leave them thirsty? Chosen one, rise, stand in this truth. You are not the rejected, you are the cornerstone, the portal, the covenant, the divine shift. Do not mourn the blindness of those who misused the gift. Their ruins are their testimony. Your rising is your answer. They thought you were too much, too intense, too unshakable, too sacred for their shallow appetite. They believed betrayal was a game, that vanishing without explanation, or even siding with those who plotted against you, would leave them untouched. Yet Proverbs 6:27 asks, can a man scoop fire into his lap without his clothes being burned? Their answer is written across their restless faces now. Drained, hollow, spiritually bankrupt. They parade smiles on social media like painted masks, while inside their soul collapses like a cathedral whose foundation was cracked by arrogance. And isn't it strange how the louder they try to project joy, the more transparent their despair becomes? No filter, no caption, no carefully curated image can hide the emptiness they now carry. Their performance has become their prison. They know what they lost. They know there is no second version of you, no copy of your frequency. The universe does not distribute divine spirits in duplicate. Isn't that why the question, wasn't it just a breakup, falls so absurdly flat? Because it was never just a breakup when the chosen are involved. There is a canyon-wide difference between an honest ending and an act of spiritual sabotage. To wound a chosen one is not merely to close a chapter, it is to set fire to your own scroll of destiny. Jeremiah 17:10 declares, I, the Lord, search the heart and examine the mind, to reward each person according to their conduct. And their conduct now stalks them like a shadow they cannot outrun. Every lie, every betrayal, every mocking laugh they threw has now become the echo they hear in silence. Do you see how justice always finds its way back? What they dismissed as trivial has become the very weight breaking their steps. Instead of walking away clean, They hurled themselves into the arms of gossip, selfishness, and the counterfeit glow of illusions masquerading as love. But counterfeit light always flickers out. Can you see why every attempt at joy in their life now turns to ashes? Their greatest failure wasn't in what they said or even what they did, it was in what they touched. They fumbled sacred treasure as if it were disposable, handling diamonds like gravel. And now their very hands, once steady, cannot seem to hold on to anything good. Isn't it striking that everything they grasp slips like water through broken fingers? And here lies the bitter irony: they were trusted with something eternal, yet treated it as if it were common. The more they try to clutch new connections, the quicker those bonds unravel, like sand slipping through their fists. Their blessings disintegrate before their eyes. The stories of Scripture echo here with haunting familiarity. Esau sold his birthright for a bowl of stew, trading eternity for a temporary appetite. And Hebrews 12:17 says, "Afterward, as you know, when he wanted to inherit this blessing, he was rejected." Even though he sought the blessing with tears, he could not change what he had done. That is the sorrow that grips them now: tears without restoration, regret without reversal. Their choice, like Esau's, cannot be undone, no matter how desperately they wish otherwise. And doesn't this truth sting, that what they treated lightly was the very thing heaven had ordained for their increase? The tragedy is not only in what they lost, but in how willingly they traded glory for crumbs. Now, every day is a reminder that some opportunities are not recycled. Great voices in history have named this kind of folly. The poet John Milton, in Paradise Lost, wrote of Lucifer's defiance: "Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven." Isn't this the same pride, to reject a divine connection, mistaking rebellion for freedom, and end up enslaved to emptiness? Pride whispered to them that they were in control, but reality proved otherwise. Their rebellion became their chain, and the crown they thought they were wearing has turned into thorns, pressing against their own mind every night. Like Milton's Fallen Angel, they rehearse their justifications, but every morning they wake to the taste of loss. And is it not tragic that their so-called freedom only revealed their captivity? Nature itself testifies: when a river is dammed recklessly, its waters no longer nourish the valley, it floods the wrong places, erodes the soil, and leaves behind desolation. That is their spirit now, no longer flowing, but stagnant and destructive. Even animals know not to block the flow that sustains life. Yet they arrogantly choked off the stream that once blessed them. Is it any wonder, then, that the fields of their life produce no fruit? The harvest is empty because they uprooted the source, and just as a poisoned spring infects every stream it touches, their broken choice spreads ruin through relationships, finances, and even their health. Have you noticed how destruction doesn't stay contained, it multiplies? And here is the sting that pierces deeper than all others. Some of them knew exactly who you were. They knew you were rare, divine, irreplaceable. They just assumed you would always bend, always return, always dim your brilliance so their dim candle could appear brighter. But when you cut the cord, the silence itself became their torment. Isn't it chilling to realize they were not just grieving you, but grieving the version of themselves your presence inspired? They mourn the courage they once borrowed from your strength, the faith they once absorbed from your prayers, the discipline they once learned from your example. And yet, instead of honoring the gift, they gambled it away. Now the silence screams, And every day without you reminds them that they threw away the one mirror that reflected their higher self. Isaiah 60:1 declares, with blazing authority, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you. So stand, chosen one. Do not dim anyone again. Let your silence thunder. Let your presence blaze." They are left mourning ruins of their own making, while you walk forward carrying the glory they could not contain. And as their regrets multiply, your light multiplies brighter, unstoppable, untouchable. Rise now, because your story is no longer tied to their collapse, it is tied to heaven's rising. And that, chosen one, is the deepest grief of all, not yours, but theirs. Every attempt to build something new feels counterfeit. Every smile rehearsed. Every celebration hollow. Why does their happiness look staged? Like actors on a dim stage, pretending the lights are still on, because they are reminded daily of what slipped through their fingers. Lamentations 3:40 declares, "Let us examine our ways and test them, and let us return to the Lord." Yet instead of returning, they repeat the same shallow scriptures. Do you see how their staged joy exposes the emptiness of their choices? But do not carry guilt for their mistake. You were never too much. You were precisely what their fractured soul needed, but their immaturity could not hold it. The same divine force that brought you into their life is the same one that pulled you out, not as punishment, but as preservation of your purpose. Isaiah 5:9 reminds us, "As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways." And what looked like rejection was heaven's redirection. They believed breaking you would end your ascent, but instead it ignited you into strength, sharpening your wisdom and fortifying your soul. Isn't it striking that their attempt to bury you became the soil of your resurrection? They were never your ending. They were the spark that ignited your rise. So let them lurk in silence. Let them scroll endlessly. Let them replay your old posts while their hearts ache for what cannot return. They didn't just lose a partner, they lost a once-in-a-lifetime connection designed to shift their very reality. They mishandled the blessing and now cradle the burden of its loss. In nature, even bees know the worth of nectar. They guard the flower that sustains them. But your ex treated nectar like poison, swatting away the very sweetness sent for their survival. Is it any wonder their new bonds turn bitter? Galatians 6:8 thunder. Whoever sows to please their flesh, from the flesh will reap destruction. Whoever sows to please the Spirit, from the Spirit will reap eternal life. Their harvest is now poisoned by the seeds of their arrogance. Their greatest tragedy is not in what they lacked, but in what they squandered. And villains in history remind us of this same blindness. Think of Pharaoh in Exodus, warned by Moses again and again. Yet his hardened heart dragged Egypt into ruin. Isn't that the same path your betrayers walk, ignoring mercy until destruction is unavoidable? The consequences they face are not random, they are the plagues of their own making. Each night becomes their Nile turned to blood. Each broken relationship, another locust swarm consuming what they built. Do you see the pattern repeating? But here is what pierces deepest. They had access to the innermost sanctuary of your soul. You lowered your walls. You let them walk freely in your inner courts. You gave loyalty, honesty, truth, prayers, and every fiber of your heart without withholding. Psalm 41:9 captures this pain. Even my close friend, someone I trusted, one who shared my bread, has turned against me. Isn't it haunting how betrayal always comes from those seated closest at the table? You did not hide your love, you gave it openly, freely, powerfully. And what did they do? They torched the blueprint of your heart. Not because they didn't recognize its worth, but because their ego shouted louder than their wisdom. Yet hear this truth: what they set ablaze will never erase you. Fire cannot consume gold, it only purifies it. Your worth remains. Your calling intensifies, and your rise cannot be stopped. Romans 8:31 proclame, if God is for us, who can be against us? Stand now, chosen one. Stand in the fire they thought would destroy you, because that same flame has become your forge. They still chose drama over peace, chaos over clarity, destruction over destiny. And now the consequence is irreversible. They cannot unsee you. They cannot unfeel you. You are etched into their spirit like an engraving on eternal stone. Every new connection becomes nothing more than a chase after your shadow, a futile attempt to imitate what only heaven could design. Isn't it strange that every step they take forward ends in emptiness? Because what they lost was never just a relationship, it was a spiritual lifeline. John 15:5 declares, apart from me, you can do nothing. And apart from the divine connection you carried, they now stumble through barren ground. You were not the one being tested, they were. And they failed not only in their words and actions, but in the deeper, unseen chambers of their soul. Their spirit collapsed under the weight of immaturity, unable to handle the depth of what God entrusted to them. Isn't it haunting that those who cry for rescue can so quickly abandon the very rescue God sends? Chosen one. Remember this: sometimes you are not the student, but the lesson itself. Not the seeker, but the answer to a prayer whispered in desperation. And when they fumbled you, they did not just lose a partner, they lost the future version of themselves that your presence was sculpting. How devastating is it to realize they mishandled the very treasure meant to elevate them? Hebrews 4:12 reminds us, for the word of God is alive and active, sharper than any double-edged sword. And that word is cutting through the illusion now. They confused access with ownership, mistaking the open door of your kindness for a deed of possession. But the truth is, they never owned you. They were only entrusted with a gift. And now that gift is gone. They thought your patience meant permanence, that your loyalty meant captivity, that your forgiveness meant permission. But Psalm 118:8 proclaims, it is better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in humans. And chosen ones never beg for love. Isn't it sobering to witness how silence itself becomes judgment? You didn't need to scream. You walked away. And that walk thundered, louder than any words. Silence has become the courtroom where their guilt is tried, and it echoes relentlessly. This pattern has unfolded throughout time. Those carrying divine energy are often betrayed by those closest. Why is that? Because divine presence exposes hidden motives, and exposure terrifies those who live in shadows. Even in modern life, this truth is still alive. I recall a bus driver named Rosa from a small town who once told her passengers, when someone leaves who carries your prayers, you will feel it in the air. You will feel the silence heavier than the noise. Isn't that exactly what they live with now? The silence that cannot be escaped. The silence that haunts like a storm before lightning strikes. Eclesiastes 3:7. A time to be silent and a time to speak. And your silence has spoken louder than every word they ignored. Science itself bears witness. Physics calls it resonance. one frequency that shifts the vibration of everything around it. That was you. You were the tuning fork of their life, the stabilizer in their chaos, the architecture of heaven woven into human presence. And when they broke that connection, their frequency collapsed into discord. Isn't it clear now why their victories feel hollow? Proverbs 13:20 declares, "Walk with the wise and become wise. For a companion of fools suffers harm, and by discarding wisdom, they enrolled in the school of sorrow." Rise, chosen one, lift your head. Do not let their collapse chain you to regret. You are the lesson, the lifeline, the resonance that reshapes the world around you. What they abandoned has become your coronation. Let their silence prove your power. Stand, because history repeats, but victory belongs to those who refuse to bow to betrayal. Isaiah 60:1 thunders, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you." Number 1, they were always cut deepest, not by enemies in the distance, but by the very people they trusted most. And isn't that the sharpest wound, the dagger that comes from the hands you once held with faith? It is the same cycle playing out again and again: betrayal, then separation, and finally elevation. Ecclesiastes 3:1 reminds us, "To everything there is a season, and a time for every purpose under heaven." And betrayal has always been the dark season that precedes the rise of the chosen, because the universe, under God's order, does not overlook injustice. Hurting someone with a divine calling is never a casual mistake. It triggers a chain reaction, not of revenge, but of holy balance. What was meant to help them bloom into greater life, they tried to uproot. And now they stand empty-handed, surrounded by consequences. Instead of flourishing, they now stare at ruins where blessings should have grown. Psalm 37:28 proclaims, "For the Lord loves the just and will not forsake his faithful ones." Yet those who mocked your faith now sit restless in rooms filled with silence. Isn't it haunting that their smiles feel forced, their laughter rehearsed, and their hearts empty even in crowded spaces? What gnaws at them is not ordinary sadness. It is the deep ache of realizing what they mishandled. They had something extraordinary, rare, heaven sent, but their immaturity made them unfit to keep it. Doesn't it strike you how immaturity always trades diamonds for dust? Now they find themselves locked out, watching you build a radiant life without them. You were gold, yet they treated you like dirt, blind to the treasure in their hands. And now their name is forever tied to the consequences of that choice. Proverbs 10:22 assures, "The blessing of the Lord brings wealth, without painful toil for it." But they forfeited that blessing through careless pride. And what does history tell us, time and again? The arrogant are remembered not for their victories, but for their losses. The poet Dante Alighieri, in his Divine Comedy, wrote of souls trapped in the inferno of their own choices, unable to escape the echoes of their pride. Isn't that a mirror of what they endure now, the endless replay of their own mistake, echoing louder than any comfort? When someone is given what people spend lifetimes praying for, real connection, real love, divine energy, and throws it away, the universe does not remain silent. Galatians 6:7 declares, "Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. They spat not on your worth, but on their own future. because their pride convinced them they didn't need to value what was sacred. And now, the ripple effects of that choice pursue them like a storm cold, heavy and unrelenting. Isn't it powerful to see how pride always writes its own sentence? Isaiah 3:11 seals it. Woe to the wicked! Disaster is upon them. They will be paid back for what their hands have done. But you rise. Stand in the clarity of this truth. You were never the failure. You were the blessing, the gold, the answered prayer. They mishandled you, but heaven has multiplied you. Your elevation is unstoppable, your worth undeniable, your destiny unbreakable. When you treat gold like it is worthless, you don't just lose it, you summon emptiness to sit at your table. You don't simply misplace a blessing, you invite famine into your own soul. They didn't just walk away from a good person, they walked away from the one who was sent to steady their storms, to be calm amid chaos, to be an anchor when the waves threatened to sink them. Psalm 46. Uno declares, God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. And you carried that very refuge into their life. Isn't it sobering that the very presence shielding them in battles they never even knew they were fighting is the one they tried to discard? You were the steady voice behind their confidence, the unseen prayers that covered them in nights of blindness. But because you didn't flaunt your power, they mistook humility for weakness. Because you forgave them, they confused it with foolishness. Because you stayed loyal, they assumed you had no standards. Yet Isaiah 5:20 warns, woe to those who call evil good and good evil, and their misjudgment became their downfall. Isn't it haunting to realize how quickly people despise what they cannot measure? They couldn't recognize the quiet strength it took to love the way you did, nor the sacred labor of turning pain into wisdom. And so they pushed, they tested, they gambled with something priceless, believing you would always remain. But chosen ones do not stay where they are dishonored. You were never meant to fight for a seat at a table when you were destined to build your own. When you finally walked away, the atmosphere itself shifted. At first, silence wrapped around them like a fog. But soon the silence roared louder than any argument. That job they once bragged about, it doesn't feel rewarding anymore. Those shallow flings they paraded cannot compare to the depth of peace you carried. The so-called upgrade they celebrated is hollow, like glass painted to resemble diamonds. Isn't it powerful to see how quickly illusions crumble when measured against the substance of truth? Now they are surrounded by noise, yet starving for real connection, haunted by the very absence they mocked. Ecclesiastes 7:8 pierces here. The end of a matter is better than its beginning, and patience is better than pride. Their pride blinded them, but the ending now reveals the cost. And you are healing. You are growing. You are evolving quietly into an even stronger version of yourself, while they remain trapped in the chaos of their own creation. Every time they scroll and see your face, every time someone mentions your name, every time they're reminded of what they once held and lost, it burns. That ache in their chest isn't random. It is the weight of their own choices pressing down like iron. Isn't it striking how memory itself can become a prison? Job 4:8 confirms. As I have observed, those who plow evil and those who sow trouble reap it. And now, their harvest arrives in the form of regret. But let us go deeper. This story isn't new. It echoes through history. People carrying holy fire are often overlooked, doubted, or mistreated in their moment. Jesus himself was rejected in his hometown, Mark 6-4. Yet that rejection became the stage for greater glory. Doesn't history prove again and again that the stone rejected becomes the cornerstone, even in nature? The lion, cast out of its pride, learns to hunt alone, and in the end, it becomes stronger than the ones who dismissed it. And so it is with you. Their rejection became your fuel. Their neglect became your catalyst. Their betrayal became the launching pad for your elevation. When someone who once lived under blessing suddenly finds themselves drowning in chaos, that collapse is never coincidence. It is the price of mishandling what heaven entrusted. Galatians 6:9 reminds, "Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up." And here is the painful truth. You never asked for much. Just honesty, respect, effort, and a little consistency. But they could not give even that. Isn't it clear now that the cost of pride is always greater than the price of humility? So, rise. Chosen one, stand in the power of your story. What they threw away has been multiplied in your hands. Their collapse is their testimony, but your rise is your inheritance. Now their own actions are chasing them like shadows they cannot outrun, and regret has their name written in bold letters across every sleepless night. This is not a coincidence, it is a consequence. You weren't just love, you were an entire atmosphere, a sacred architecture built around their life. You poured into them with intention and purpose. And like an architect who designs with precision, every act of kindness became a pillar. Every prayer became a beam. Every moment of patience became the foundation. But they were too selfish, too blind, too entangled in their own chaos to recognize the design. Isn't it chilling how people cry for blessings but despise the very vessel sent to deliver them? Proverbs 14:1 declares, "The wise woman builds her house, but with her own hands the foolish one tears hers down." They didn't just lose you, they demolished the house heaven built around them. This isn't bad luck. This is a correction. Divine justice is stepping in with a message that can no longer be ignored. When you treat something rare like it's common, you don't simply lose it, you are left with silence. And silence, chosen one, is confirmation that you were never too much. They were simply too small to hold something so vast. Isn't it true that silence often screams louder than words? When someone mishandles a divine connection, they should not be surprised when their blessings evaporate, like rivers cut off from their source. Psalm 84:11 proclaims, "The Lord bestows favor and honor. No good thing does he withhold from those whose walk is blameless." Yet they forfeited favor by despising what was holy. Real energy isn't fake. It isn't performance. It isn't about appearances. It is frequency, resonance, vibration, the invisible laws of heaven that shape reality itself. You can't treat a chosen soul like a disposable thrill and expect your life to remain unchanged. Isn't it clear that disruption always follows dishonor? When they disrespected a connection filled with peace, clarity, and healing, they didn't merely wound you, they shut the door on the very blessings that were tied to your presence. Isaiah 59:2 reminds us, "Your iniquities have separated you from your God. Your sins have hidden his face from you." Their own disrespect built the wall that now blocks their abundance. There is no smooth escape from spiritual wrongdoing. There is only a shift, a breakdown, a collapse. You weren't just someone they dated. You were an inflection point, a divine interruption, a shift in their entire energy field. Isn't it striking how one person can alter the whole trajectory of another's life? You brought comfort into their chaos, clarity into their confusion, hope into their hopelessness. You didn't just arrive, you changed the frequency of every room you entered. Acts 17:28 confirms, "For in him we live and move and have our being, and through you." His presence moved in ways they could not comprehend. Instead of guarding that gift, they wasted it. Instead of protecting the resonance, they mocked it. They laughed like you would always be there, like the architect would never leave the house. But when the cornerstone departs, the structure cannot stand. And now, as they walk among the ruins of their own pride, their laughter has turned hollow. Isn't it haunting that the echo of your absence is louder than your presence ever was? I recall the words of a woman named Marisol, a seamstress from a small village, who once said, "If you pull the golden thread out of a garment, don't wonder why it unravels." Her wisdom, born not of books but of lived scars, is the mirror of their downfall. They pulled out the golden thread, you, and now everything is unraveling in their hands. Galatians 6-7 echoes once more. Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. And fru, so rise. Chosen one, stand taller than the ruins they left behind. You are not the collapse, you are the construction. The cathedral, the resonance heaven protects. What they mocked has become the very evidence of your glory. Do not shrink. Do not dim. Their downfall is their inheritance, but your rise is your crown. They acted as if your love was an endless well, a river that would never run dry. But now, their thirst has no relief. They sit in hollow rooms filled with people who cannot see them, posting smiles that crack under the weight of guilt, victories that feel shallow, connections that feel like chasing smoke. What once felt like peace now burns as punishment. Echoing Proverbs 14:14, the faithless will be fully repaid for their ways, and the good rewarded for theirs. Isn't it haunting that the very presence which steadied them now torments them in absence? Every quiet night testifies against them. Every ignored message has become a stone of judgment. The person they ran to cannot touch their soul the way you did. The life they thought they wanted is exposed as plastic, fake, meaningless. They called losing your freedom. But doesn't it feel more like prison when energy itself testifies against them? Jeremiah 2:13 says, "My people have forsaken me, the spring of living water, and have dug their own cisterns, broken cisterns that cannot hold water. They abandoned their living water and now drown in emptiness." You brought balance. You brought direction. You brought purpose. Without you, nothing feels stable, neither sleep, nor food, nor even the triumphs they once boasted. Because when spirit is disconnected, every layer of life begins to rot. Isn't it striking how success turns hollow when peace is gone? This isn't about curses or revenge, it's about divine law. Galatians 6-7 warns, "Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows." What they mishandled was never just romance, it was a covenant. And every covenant carries consequences. They tried to replace you with something easier, but regret clings to them like iron chains, surrounded by crowds, yet starving for your light. They live, Psalm 32, 3-inch real-time. When I kept silent, my bones wasted away through my groaning all day long. They thought silence was strength, but silence became decay. Isn't it powerful that what they tried to bury is now louder than their excuses? Let's be clear, they never ghosted you. Ghosting was camouflage, not growth. It wasn't peace, it was guilt. That sudden silence, those ignored calls, that drained energy, these were not signs of moving forward, but of running away. They weren't escaping you, they were fleeing from the truth. You reflected back at them, and truth, unlike timelines and blocked numbers, cannot be erased. Psalm 51, 3 declares, "For I know my transgressions, and my sin is always before me." That is the courtroom they now live in, haunted by the version of themselves they hoped you would never expose. You can block a person, but you cannot block energy. You can delete messages, but you cannot delete the truth. You can vanish from screens, but you cannot outrun the weight of spiritual consequence. Isn't it piercing to realize that silence is not freedom, but captivity in disguise? Their quiet moments are filled with noise now. Songs sting, places ache, dreams replay the memories they tried to bury. Guilt has become the loudest voice in their life, louder than pride, louder than lies, louder than the masks they wear. As the great composer Gustav Mahler once wrote in his Resurrection Symphony, "What has come into being must pass away. What has passed away must rise again." They thought silence would kill your spirit, but it only resurrected your power. Their calm front never grew. It was guilt dressed up in disguise. And now, chosen one, it is your time to rise. Stand in the truth that outlived their denial. Stand in the freedom they feared. Stand, because your silence has become the trumpet of heaven, declaring your victory. And now that guilt is chasing them like a shadow at noon, showing up in memories, in faces, in the way your energy still lingers in every room they enter. Chosen one, you didn't lose them, they abandoned the light. And by doing so, they imprisoned themselves in the weight of what they tried to bury. Isn't it striking how truth never stays silent? How presence never truly fades? How echoes of what was once divine always return louder than before? John 1-5 declares, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." They tried to throw away your light, yet now they are haunted by the glow that refuses to die. If this is piercing your spirit, drop 88-inch the comments. Let the other chosen ones know the shift has already begun. Because what comes next is not just a twist in your story, it is a quake that will shake foundations. This wasn't just heartbreak, it was spiritual warfare. An ambush staged in silence. Some betrayals are not about emotions, but about altars. Not about broken hearts, but about infiltration. Isn't it chilling to realize that energy which could not touch you head-on tried instead to move through someone close? Ephesians 6:12 reminds us, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world." Your battle was never with them, it was with the forces working through them. While you poured your heart into love, they sat at tables of mockery with those plotting your downfall. They didn't flinch when your name was slandered. They didn't protect you when your spirit was attacked. They leaned in, they laughed, they nodded in agreement, letting jealousy and envy clothe their words. Isn't it haunting that the ones closest often become the very vessels for the enemy's farthest? Psalm 41-9 captures it perfectly. Even my close friend, someone I trusted, one who shared my bread, has turned against me. That betrayal was deeper than your eyes could see. A spiritual ambush hidden behind a familiar smile. You thought love meant safety, yet hidden among affection was infiltration. What you didn't realize was that the very energy that despised you used someone close as its disguise. Isn't it piercing that the same lips once praising you could so quickly echo gossip? They weren't blind to your light, they were consumed by their own smallness when standing in it. Instead of rising higher to meet your shine, they shrank, dropping down to the level of those threatened by what they could not match. Proverbs 26, 24 warns, enemies disguise themselves with their lips, but in their hearts they harbor deceit. Their betrayal was never about confusion, it was about corruption. And history has mirrored this pattern before. Think of Cain, the firstborn of Adam, who could not bear Abel's sacrifice of excellence. His jealousy, unchecked, turned into bloodshed. And Genesis 4-7 speaks with timeless relevance. Sin is crouching at your door, it desires to have you, but you must rule over it. Cain hose jealousy over love. Just as those around you chose envy over honor, and the consequence followed him forever. Isn't it terrifying how quickly a heart can become a vessel when pride opens the door? This wasn't confusion. This wasn't a tough breakup. This was infiltration. Spiritual strategy disguised as intimacy. But here is the victory. What the enemy meant for harm, heaven is already using for your elevation. Génesis 50:20 declares, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Their betrayal was the platform for your breakthrough. Their laughter was the soil for your resurrection. Their silence was the trumpet of your rising. So, rise. Chosen one, stand taller than the whispers. Walk stronger than the betrayal. Shine brighter than envy. For what was meant to break you has become the very evidence that you are unbreakable. This was not romance gone wrong. It was a spiritual attack wearing the mask of love. You weren't simply trying to love them, you were trying to heal them, to carry them through storms they didn't even know how to name, to pray them into growth, to shield them when their own strength collapsed. Isn't it piercing to realize you thought your energy could mend what was shattered, only to discover the cracks were intentional? Ephesians 6:11 warns, "Put on the full armor of God, so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes." They weren't falling by accident. They had already opened the door and let the poison in. And once poison enters, it spreads, infecting everything pure, twisting love into control and intimacy into warfare. Even psychologists describe this as self-sabotage. When the human mind betrays itself by choosing destruction over healing, how many times did you wonder why they resisted the very thing they prayed for? You noticed the shift, didn't you? The way their words sharpened like knives, the sudden coldness in their tone, the subtle jabs that chipped at your peace, the distance they created without explanation. The mind games designed to keep you spinning, that wasn't random. It was the weight of wrong voices pressing against them, filling their spirit with static, breaking the resonance of what you built together. Isn't it chilling, that silence? Disappearing acts and confusion were not just immaturity, but strategy. They weren't seeking growth, they were hoping you'd unravel yourself, trying to decode their behavior. Psalm 55:21 describes this perfectly. His talk is smooth as butter, yet war is in his heart. His words are more soothing than oil, yet they are drawn swords. Even science calls this psychological projection, when someone's hidden guilt disguises itself as hostility toward the one trying to love them. How much energy did you waste trying to translate behavior that was never meant to make sense? But here's what they never expected. You weren't standing alone. You were covered, surrounded, upheld by a frequency higher than any shadow. Isaiah 54:17 thunders. No weapon formed against you shall prosper, and you will refute every tongue that accuses you. Every whispered word against your name was recorded, every false story tallied, every daggered silence marked. Isn't it striking that the very silence they thought would break you was the exact moment the universe shifted in your favor? What was meant to crush you became the seedbed for your rise. And isn't this the mystery of faith, that attacks intended for your downfall become blueprints for your elevation? In physics, we call this resonance, the way one vibration awakens another. Their betrayal only amplified the divine frequency you already carried. And now they sit in the storm they summoned. The confusion they left you in has folded back onto them. The chaos they fed is drowning their steps. Isn't it poetic justice that the winds they stirred now scatter their own peace? Nothing flows anymore. Joy feels artificial. Peace slips away. Blessings slide through their fingers like sand. Galatians 6:7 echo. Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. By partnering with darkness to extinguish light, they didn't weaken you, they contaminated themselves. Darkness doesn't vanish, it stains everything it touches. Even nature agrees, when a tree's roots rot, no branch can bear fruit. No matter how green the leaves once appeared, their life is now a forest without harvest, beauty without substance, laughter without joy. And here lies the saddest truth. They didn't just lose you. They lost their only real chance at transformation. You were their mirror, their opportunity. The one person who reflected who they could have become. Isn't it haunting that instead of rising to the reflection, they smashed the mirror? Now they are left with broken shards, fake peace, and memories of what authenticity felt like. Their lie wasn't just against you, it was permission granted to dark energy to work through them. Yet here is the irony. The only path destroyed was theirs. John 3:20 explains, everyone who does evil hates the light, and will not come into the light for fear that their deeds will be exposed. How many blessings have they now lost? Not because they weren't offered, but because they couldn't bear to face the truth you carried. And isn't it tragic that guilt becomes their constant companion, whispering louder than any apology ever could? And history repeats itself with cautionary tales. Think of King Rehoboam, Solomon's son, who scorned wise counsel, listened to voices of arrogance, and split the kingdom in two. Isn't that the same blindness, to mock the very source of blessing and then wonder why collapse arrives? Their arrogance convinced them your kindness was weakness, your discernment was foolishness, your glow was luck. But 1 Corinthians 1:27 proclaims, God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. What they dismissed as softness was sacred strength. In architecture, ignoring the cornerstone always collapses the building. In psychology, ignoring the healer always prolongs the wound. And in life, dishonoring the chosen always guarantees regret. So rise, chosen one. Stand with the authority of one who cannot be broken. The darkness they entertained has devoured their peace, but your light multiplies. You are the blessing they mishandled, the fortress they underestimated, the mirror they feared. Their collapse is their inheritance, but your glow is your crown. Isn't it time you stop mourning what was lost and start celebrating what cannot be taken? Isaiah 60:1 calls out, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you. Stand, chosen one, because your silence has already spoken louder than their betrayal ever could." But what they never realized until it was too late was that you were the very reason their fragile world hadn't completely collapsed. You weren't just a chapter in their life story. You were the invisible scaffolding, the spiritual architecture keeping their house from crumbling. Psalm 91:4 declares, "He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge. His faithfulness will be your shield and rampart." That was you, chosen, one faithfulness embodied, walking, favor, clothed in human form. Isn't it haunting to see how people take stability for granted until the ground begins to shake beneath them? Your prayers, your presence, your quiet covering were the unseen shield, deflecting arrows they never even knew were flying toward them. And how did they respond to such divine alignment? They mocked it. They dismissed your warnings as paranoia, ignored your intuition as overthinking, and treated your love as ordinary. Yet 1 Thessalonians 5:20 says, "Do not treat prophecies with contempt, but test them all. Hold on to what is good." Isn't it chilling that what they labeled too much was the very thread holding their world together, your spiritual discernment? The dreams you shared, the inner voice you carried, those were the alarms heaven sounded. And they muted them. They thought your passion was a flaw when it was really protection. They thought your prayers were excessive when they were actually oxygen. And now, as oxygen runs out, doesn't it strike you how suddenly they wish they had listened? You weren't ordinary. You were placed in their life for a divine reason, an assignment dressed as companionship. Your presence was a wall against destruction, a firewall between them and disaster. Isaiah 58:12 says, "You will be called repairer of broken walls, restorer of streets with dwellings." That was your role, repairer, restorer, guardian. You poured into them when they were too careless to grow, shielded them when they squandered their own strength, carried them when their own legs buckled. Isn't it strange that only when the carrier steps aside do they realize how heavy their own load truly is? And now they feel it. The pressure in their chest, the anxiety that grips them at night, the emptiness that refuses to be filled. It isn't random. It's the consequence of losing your covering. What once flowed freely now dries up like rivers cut from their source. Psalm 37:28 says, "For the Lord loves the just and will not forsake his faithful ones. Wrongdoers will be completely destroyed. The offspring of the wicked will perish." Isn't it powerful that destruction always begins where honor ends? The very balance they thought belonged to them was borrowed from you. And now that balance has returned to its rightful owner. Opportunities that once seemed to fall in their lap suddenly vanish. People they thought were allies now drift away. Even rest, something so basic, feels like a battlefield. And this is not bad luck. It is not just life. It is the spiritual law of resonance and consequence. Galatians 6:7 reminds, "Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows." Isn't it piercing that they are reaping not because you cursed them, but because they dishonored what kept them safe? The peace they thought was their own was never theirs at all. It was your energy, your prayers, your alignment resonating behind the scenes like a symphony. No one applauded. Voices from art and music capture this truth. The composer Franz Schubert in his Mass in G major, wrote passages where sudden silence carries more weight than the music itself. Isn't that what your absence has become? A silence heavier than sound. A reminder echoing through their soul that what was dismissed as ordinary was extraordinary all along. And today, chosen one, that silence is not your weakness, it is your loudest testimony. So stand, rise. Do not mourn what was wasted. They mocked the covering that kept them alive. But you carry the anointing that still multiplies. Their collapse is their classroom, but your rise is your coronation. Isaías 60:1 declares, Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you. Your glow was never luck. It was for a purpose, and now it shines brighter than ever. Now that you are gone, the storm is circling back with a vengeance, roaring in ways they cannot silence. They thought their peace was permanent, that the calm would linger no matter how they treated you. But what they never understood is that their stability was never their own. It was borrowed, carried by your covering, hidden in the shelter of your prayers. You were the balance in their chaos, the weight on the scale that kept judgment from tipping against them. Psalm 91:1 says, Whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. Isn't it piercing that while you stood with them, they lived in borrowed rest, yet mocked the very shadow protecting them? When they ridiculed what they could not comprehend, heaven itself intervened. The blessing didn't leave because it ran out. It left because it was dishonored. And now they are scrambling. They try to replicate your energy, to search for it in shallow places, to find it in faces that never carried what you carried. But they can't, because what you brought was never transferable. It was assigned. Isn't it haunting that they now chase shadows, reaching for ghosts, desperately trying to fill the sacred space that only you were designed to hold? Ecclesiastes 5:19 reminds, when God gives someone wealth and possessions and the ability to enjoy them, this is a gift of God. What you were to them was a gift, not an accident. Nothing they attempt is working. And slowly, painfully, their eyes are opening. The blessing didn't feel big because it was loud. It felt big because it was real. And what is real can never be replaced by what only imitates the form. They laughed when you cried, mistaking your pain for collapse. But you weren't breaking, you were birthing. You were shedding the shell of who you once were to step into a version of yourself they were never worthy to witness. John 16:20 declares, You will weep and mourn while the world rejoices. You will grieve, but your grief will turn to joy. Isn't it chilling that they cheered at your tears, not realizing those tears were watering the soil of your transformation? The snake laughs when the eagle is silent. But silence is not defeat. Silence is the strategy of hunters. They misread your pause as weakness, not understanding. It was preparation. They felt powerful, watching you wrestle with doubt, convincing themselves that your struggle was their triumph. They mistook your heartbreak for an ending. But endings for the chosen are always preludes to elevation. Proverbs 24:16 confirms, Though the righteous falls 7 times, they rise again. But the wicked stumble when calamity strikes. Isn't it striking how those who danced at your downfall now tremble at your rise, even if they never mocked you openly? In the spirit, they celebrated your wounds. They toasted your silence as if it were defeat. But your silence was the womb of a new sound, the sound of resurrection. And history leaves us reminders of this blindness. Nero, the emperor of Rome, mocked the early Christians as weak, throwing them to arenas, laughing as if their deaths sealed his victory. Yet centuries later, it is their faith that reshaped civilizations, while Nero's empire crumbled into dust. Isn't that the same irony, that those who celebrate the breaking of the chosen end up haunted by the very legacy they tried to extinguish? Their laughter was premature, their victory counterfeit, their judgment flawed. Now, chosen one, stand. Your tears have already turned into testimony. Your silence has already become a strategy. Your heartbreak has already transformed into a breakthrough. Isaiah 60, 1 commands. Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you. You are not defined by what they mocked. You are crowned by what you endured. Stand, because their storm is proof of your strength, and your rise is proof of your calling. But what they failed to see through their shallow lens was that you weren't breaking down, you were breaking through. They mistook your silence for surrender, your tears for weakness, your pause for collapse. Yet in reality, you were undergoing metamorphosis, a transformation so profound, the old version of you had to shatter for the new to be born. Romans 8:18 declares, I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. Isn't it staggering that what looked like an ending to them was actually the prelude to glory? That pain wasn't your finish line, it was the beginning of rebirth. Every fiber of your being stretched like the arches of a cathedral under construction, making space for a version of you they would never have access to again. Every tear you cried was not wasted water, it was baptism. Every sleepless night wasn't torment, but cleansing. Every surge of rage or sadness was fuel, converting despair into momentum. You weren't crumbling, you were breaking free. They thought they had destroyed you, but all they did was ignite the very fire that elevated you. Isn't it haunting that betrayal became your activation code? Job 23:10 testifies, but he knows the way that I take when he has tested me. I will come forth as gold. The process they mocked was the furnace refining your spirit, the very launch pad for your rise. Heartbreak didn't weaken you, it tempered you. Disappointment didn't end you, it activated you. And in that activation, you discovered resilience you didn't even know you carried. Psychologists call this post-traumatic growth. The paradox, where deep wounds become the birthplace of new strength. Isn't it ironic that the same fire meant to burn you alive forged you into something unshakable as you shed old wounds, toxic habits, and the need to shrink yourself for counterfeit love? You stepped into the architecture of your true power. Hebrews 12:1 whispers, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. You stopped over, giving to those who drained you. You stopped dimming your light so others could shine. That smaller version of you, the one who tolerated disrespect, who excused abuse, who thought endurance was love, died in the labor of your transformation. In its place rose someone stronger, wiser, freer than ever before. Isn't it piercing that the very collapse they celebrated birthed a you they can no longer touch, now with clear eyes? You discern the games. With heightened spiritual resonance, you feel the shifts in energy. With sharpened perception, you know your strength, and their reach no longer intimidates you. Isaiah 40:31 shouts, but those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles, They will run and not grow weary. You are no longer prey, you are ascendant, walking with authority while those who mocked now tremble at your rise. And those same people who ridiculed your pain are now forced to watch from the outside, realizing too late that what they witnessed wasn't your downfall but your ascension. They walked away from something rare, convinced they could replace it with ease. But isn't it chilling that what they ended up with were hollow imitations, cheap echoes of what they once held? They didn't walk into real love. They stumbled into counterfeits, empty copies of what they once despised but secretly craved. Luke 12:48 seals their judgment. From everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded, and from the one who has been entrusted with much, much more will be asked. They were entrusted with a treasure and squandered it, and now they face the weight of that loss. And even ordinary voices echo this eternal truth. I recall a janitor named Matteo from a small town who once said, "People think breaking glass means destruction, but sometimes breaking glass means light finally enters the room." Isn't that exactly what your story reveals? They thought your breaking meant ruin, but your breaking only opened the windows for light to pour in. Their mockery has turned into silence, and your silence has turned into radiance. So rise, chosen one. The crown of your transformation gleams brighter than their counterfeit victories. You are not defined by their rejection, you are refined by it. Stand, because your ascension is undeniable, your resilience unshakable, your destiny unstoppable. Isaiah 61 commands, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you." They settled for a clone, a shallow copy that could only mimic your outline but never carry your essence. They traded gold for glitter, substance for show, and now all they hold is dust slipping through their fingers. That new person may try to act like you, talk like you, even dress like you, but it's all surface, hollow imitations with no weight. Isn't it haunting how quickly people confuse resemblance with reality? Ecclesiastes 1:2 declares, "Vanity of vanities, all is vanity." What they thought was stability turned out to be decoration. It doesn't carry your depth, your wisdom, your divine resonance, and no matter how much they try to pretend, the absence of your spirit cannot be duplicated. They thought they had found peace, but what they really stumbled into was comfort without growth. Isn't it tragic that comfort can feel like security when in truth it is a cage? They ran to someone who would never challenge them, who wouldn't hold up a mirror to expose their shadows, who would let them shrink rather than rise. Jeremiah 6:14 says, "They dress the wound of my people as though it were not serious. Peace, peace," they say, when there is no peace. That is their reality surface, calm with no true healing. At first, the ease felt like relief, but now that comfort suffocates, turning soft walls into invisible bars. Every day they feel it. Every time they look into the eyes of the one beside them and still feel unseen. The emptiness echoes louder. Isn't it piercing that even in a full room they feel the void you left? Every quiet second testifies against them. In the silence of night, when distractions fade, they realize they lost something sacred they will never retrieve. You weren't simply a partner, you were covenant, sanctuary, and mirror. Meanwhile, you have moved on, not just outwardly, but inwardly, spiritually, completely. 2 Corinthians 5:17 proclaims, "If anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come. The old has gone. The new is here. That is you now. You no longer bend to fit into smallness. You no longer shrink to make others feel large. Isn't it powerful that the very traits they mocked have now become your crown? You have stepped into your power unapologetically, without explanation, radiating authenticity that cannot be dimmed, and they know it. They see it in the way your glow unsettles them. They feel it in the pit of their chest when your name comes up. They know they cannot reach you anymore. And that truth stings deeper than any wound, not because you are punishing them, but because connection once divine has been severed. Isaiah 59:2 says, "But your iniquities have separated you from your God. Your sins have hidden his face from you." Sin separates. Dishonor severs. And what they are left with is nothing more than a shadow of what they once held. Isn't it chilling that what they chose over you now feels like silence dressed up in skin, a pretty face with no foundation, a relationship without architecture, a copy that can mimic the outside but will never reach the soul? In art, Michelangelo once said of his sculptures, "The greatest danger is not carving too little, but stopping before truth is revealed." Isn't that the mirror of their mistake? They chose a surface, but the surface has no breath. They abandoned the carving of truth and settled for stone unformed. And now the echo of your absence is louder than their new presence could ever be. That is why today you stand renewed. Psalm 30:5 reminds us, "Weeping may stay for the night, but rejoicing comes in the morning." You are that morning, chosen one, the dawn they forfeited, the resurrection they mocked, the glory they misread. Stand in it, shine in it, for your rise is their reminder, and your faith is your fortress. Chosen ones. Let this sink in. The story was never about your ex escaping judgment. It was about God proving once again that no lie, no betrayal, and no secret alliance against you can outrun truth. Just as Psalm 37:13 says, "The Lord laughs at the wicked, for he knows their day is coming." Their choices have opened the very case that now exposes them. The CIA may investigate their past, but heaven already revealed their motives. What they tried to bury has become the evidence that haunts them. And you stand as living proof that no weapon formed against you prospers. Their betrayal became your activation. Their silence became your shield. Their downfall became your testimony. Isn't it extraordinary that what was meant to break you now announces your elevation? If this message shook something in your spirit, don't let it end here. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and drop a comment, yes. Even a simple 777 to let the world know you're still standing strong. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next revelation, because every word spoken here is meant to sharpen your journey. To those who have given through super thanks, I speak blessing over you. Your generosity fuels this mission. And to those who simply watch, listen, and engage, you are just as vital to this calling. Your presence here is proof that the chosen ones are rising together. So may you walk with clarity, may you rise with strength, and may peace follow you wherever you go. Until next time, stand tall. Chosen one. Your story isn't ending, it's only just beginning.